Hello, my name is Greg Massi, and this is episode number 40 of The Color of Air, a podcast about the musical journey. It's January 31st, 2019. I'm struggling to remember how to do the intro to my podcast because, according to the archives, I haven't recorded one of these since October of 2017. And it's been way too long. But I made the decision at the end of last year that I was going to bring it back. And it just seemed to kind of line up perfectly that February 1st is a Friday. I decided, why don't I release episodes on Friday? There's no real reason why I needed to continue on releasing episodes on Thursday, or haphazardly as it kind of ended up being. So Friday will be the new day. And hopefully, I will have more episodes coming out at regular intervals. I've got a couple episodes backlogged. I've got a few ideas I want to explore. And I know it's called the podcast about the musical journey, but I'd like to maybe branch out a little bit from just music and, really focus in on all sorts of artistic endeavors. As from past episodes, I've discussed with, Rob Patillo and Michael J. Epstein and Sophia Casciola about TV and movies and internet stuff. And for 2 years, I've been involved in the wrestling business, which is kind of crazy in and of itself. And I feel like there's people I've met along my own journey, musical or just regular life journey, that I feel would be interesting to talk to. So we'll see where this podcast takes us. But I hope you're along for the ride, and I hope you enjoy where we go. If you're a regular listener of the podcast, you might have noticed we have a nice little fresh coat of paint on here. A brand new theme song to bring us in. It's a theme song I wrote for Mr. Darius Carter in Capital Wrestling. It's one of the best ones that I think I've done. So it just seemed like a nice, bold, new proclamation of the color of air coming back. Give it a nice, big intro to kind of freshen it up a little bit, given that I want to explore other things and see where we go. And, it just seemed right. And it's also kind of ironic that it's episode number 40, and I just recently turned 40 in July of 2018. So, yeah, I guess there's not really much else to that. I thought it would be a much more interesting segue, but it really wasn't. So anyway, getting the plugs out of the way, you can find us online at retconindustries.com. There's a link to the podcast there, or colorofair.com will take you direct to that page. We are on facebook.com/colorofairpodcast, Twitter @thecolorofair, and you can email us at colorofairpodcast@gmail.com. Also, Ret Con Industries has a Facebook page as well. And we are also on Instagram as Ret Con Industries. So, I don't really know what the shorthand is for it, but look us up. There's really not many other places called Ret Con Industries. So go for it, see what happens. So I guess there's really not much else to report. I mean, it seems like it's just been a crazy, couple of years since I talked to you last. I mean, Capital Wrestling's been going strong and building. I've been busier than I've ever been, recording music, doing work for Capital and other independent wrestlers. Concilium, my band, is doing really well. We're on the heels of a couple return performances with our new drummer, Joe. And we've got an EP that's going to be coming out hopefully soon. So things have been good. And there's really no short and simple way to really explain everything that's gone on the last couple of years. So let's just say it's been an interesting time, and I'm glad to be back here with you. And I'm extremely happy at the chance to release this first podcast because it's one that I've been sitting on for a while. This is an interview I did with Terran Olson, who many of you know as one of the original members of Maudlin of the Well, back when we became a kind of live playing entity, and around the time that we started doing when we tracked Bath and Leaving Your Body Map. That's when Terran kind of joined the band. So I guess maybe not an original member, but he feels like an original member to me. And so Terran and I sat down when he was visiting, and I can't even remember how long this was. And he asked me to hold on to this and release it after he had put out his new project, Vesper Moth. And they just released their debut record, or I guess it's technically an EP, I'm not sure. But their first recordings as a band, let's put it that way. It's called A Sea Become Winged, and I believe it was self-released. You could tell I did my research really well. But the bottom line is, I'm really proud of Terran. This band also features Sam Gutterman, formerly of Maudlin of the Well, on drums. And it's a project that they've been working on for many, many years now. And they've gone through a couple, I think, lineup changes. And, there's the normal stuff you go through when you're trying to build momentum towards your band. Putting something out and really trying to get yourself out there. So I'm extremely proud of these guys. I really enjoy the record a lot. And I was very honored to be asked to contribute to it. So before we get into the interview, let's give you a little taste of the Vesper Moth record, A Sea Become Winged. And this is the song Full Circle, which features a guest solo by me. Enjoy. I don't even really know what the I'm such an idiot. I don't know what the different patterns on the mic are for.
Well, so like the circle one is probably omnidirectional,
Yep.
right? And that second one looks like it's sort of in between omni and cardioid.
Mm-hmm.
And then that next one looks like it's I don't know. I don't know what that one is. But then like the figure eight sort of seems like, accepts front and back and rejects sides. I'm not sure in which situation you'd want it that, but
Yeah, options. There's even options on the back of these two, I think. Yeah, there's like little like kilohertz and
oh yeah, well so that's decibel padding in case I guess you're recording something super loud. Oh yeah, that's something if you're using these mics for rehearsal, you might try using the pad.
I don't use these mic. I use the built-in mic on them.
Oh, I see. Yeah, and then the roll off, that's just a high pass filter to get rid of any like low rumblings or whatever if you're not recording anything that's supposed to have those frequencies.
Yeah. Okay. So I've been recording.
Oh, okay.
Start with the the nerdy description of
Yes. Start with the roll off options.
cardioid band. Well, it's funny. Before I started recording, we were talking about you're talking about like the microphone stands and how silly they are.
Yeah.
Well, it just reminds me of a funny story where Julie was taking cello lessons in Cambridge when we lived in Arlington, and I mean, it was like beginner cello, whatever, and so they had like the final senior, or not senior, but the final recital, and so they got all the cello students to play Pachelbel's Canon.
Oh no.
Right, but it's simple, it's like simple enough for a beginner.
Yeah.
They're not gonna play like the Brandenburg concertos or whatever.
Yeah, but I mean, they could play something you haven't heard 8 billion times already.
They could, or they could just do that. But so they had this violinist who was there, and um, it was just like it was a total Cambridge, Massachusetts stereotype, like turtleneck, like black turtleneck, spoke with an air of smugness, and so the room where it was taking place, so they had this box full of instrument stands, but they were, or music stands, I mean, but they were broken apart. So like, like you remember from music school, like how like the top part of the music stand would come off.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So there's a bunch of like top parts and bottom parts, but it was two different types of music stands.
Oh, okay.
So you had to find the right one for one thing, and so it was tough to like get them together, like to find a matching one, and so Mr. Smug Asshole goes, "Huh? Who would have thought it would have been so hard to take a stand in Cambridge?"
Oh.
I told Julie, I was like, I wanted to launch myself from my seat and just start pounding him. Just be like, shut the that's not funny. And then it got even worse. Like, so then they're, like I said, they're playing Pachelbel's Canon, and before they started playing, he was like, well, many would say that this has become canon with most wedding music now.
Wait, who is this person? He was just
Yes,
someone they needed to play the violin part?
Yeah.
So that it wasn't just a bunch of cellos doing continuo
it was
for an hour?
8 cellos playing Pachelbel's Canon. Oh, it was great. I mean, it was, I don't know, I thought it was fun. So, we're recording this in May, but it probably won't come out for a little while. So by the time this comes out, you'll be releasing an album with your band, Vesper Moth. Did I remember the name correctly?
Yep, that's it.
Okay. And it's kind of weird. Like, I feel like I have to ask like the stupid interview questions. It's like kind of silly because like I've known you for over 20 years. So, or no, probably about 20 years.
Yeah, pretty close to that.
Yeah, since you were at Hampshire.
Yep.
And so like I know all the stupid backstory, but it's of interest, because my Maudlin of the Well themed episodes are my highest ranked, my most popular ones. Like the most popular episode of mine is Toby's, and then
Sure.
Byron's, and then Ron, even though he's not technically Maudlin, but
Well, no, he's in Kayo Dot.
yeah. So, but like any podcast I do related to those projects are usually like more popular with the 20 people who listen to my podcast. So yeah, so Vesper Moth is you and Sam, the
Yep.
drummer from Maudlin of the Well. So now you guys both live in Oakland, California.
Yep.
So when did this all come together?
Well, I mean, I knew I wanted to start a band when I moved back out to California in like 2013, I think. And Sam was out there, so and I he's an amazing drummer, so like knew from the beginning if he was willing to be in the band, it'd be great to have him. And then and actually I had already started writing music for it. There were a few songs I'd written already. And so I kind of knew the instrumentation at that point. At that point, it was going to be voice, Rhodes, bass, drums. So then it was just a matter of finding bass player and singer. And bass was pretty easy because I knew Ree and he was interested. Finding the singer was definitely the trickiest part because there wasn't anyone that came to mind immediately that I knew. Just sort of started asking around, with friends when I was back in town, and finally got connected with Vanessa Beggs, who was at Mills when I did meet her when I was at Mills, but didn't know her real well. But I talked to her about the band, and she just worked out really well. She's an amazing singer, and we were really psyched to have her in the band. And finally, went and learned the songs and did a demo that we recorded ourselves in the rehearsal space, and then she moved to Pennsylvania.
as it normally happens.
Yeah, so then we were kind of back to square one, and yeah, it was another several months of trying to talking to people and figure out who was around, and even started posted to Craigslist and put up posters at Amoeba Music and somewhere on the Berkeley campus. And then randomly met Janet, I think, the first time I talked to her was definitely at it was his birthday, and a bunch of people went out to sushi, and our friend Santre was there, and she sort of brought Janet along also. Which was random, but worked out really, really well for us because, I ended up sitting next to her and you're talking about stuff and looking for a singer. And she was actually, dance is her main thing. But she actually, does have a history with music and singing also, and had actually been, I guess, thinking about wanting to do more musical stuff. So that just kind of, worked out really, really well. And she came into rehearsal a week or two later and ran through a song, and it was just like after that just the one time everyone in the band was like, yeah, she's great, let's invite her to be in the band. And it's been awesome. It has been of course now then she had to learn all the songs, and she's got her own creative projects, so that's something that we've still been working towards, and writing new music too. Like the song we opened the set with now is new since Vanessa was in the band, so it's not even just that she's learning the songs Vanessa was, but there's new songs. So now we've got that down, and we finally have been playing out and had some really, really awesome shows. Now just looking towards going to the studio and making a proper studio recording with Janet, which I'm really looking forward to.
All right, cool. And so now So the project kind of came together in 2013 or whatever when you went back out to, or around there.
Yeah, so it's when I sort of started assembling
Right,
people.
exactly. But I mean, would you say that like some of the ideas you've had, like was it music that you've been writing since, since forever? Since because when we lived together at Jamaica Plain when we first moved out here with Maudlin as well, I mean, like we were all in Maudlin, we were doing that, but I think we all had our kind of side things that we were, or our own music.
Yeah.
Because when you're in Maudlin, I mean, actually. Here's the first Maudlin thing I can say. What? You're the only person in Maudlin who got a song on a record that wasn't written by, who got one of their songs on the record.
Yep.
The Ferryman. Because for the most part, I mean, most people know this, that, Toby wrote all the songs from Maudlin and Kayo Dot.
Mm-hmm.
But you're the only one to get a song on a record.
Yeah, I'm very proud of that distinction.
But even so, I'm sure we were all like working on our own little ideas. I mean, did you have music back then that kind of carried over?
Yeah, so the stuff on the record, it is a mix. Some stuff, like I was saying, was even new since Vanessa came and then moved away. But yeah, like one of the songs actually does have some music that I think I was working on. Yeah, but definitely back when we were living in Boston, and I think we might have even like played through parts of it in the rehearsal space one, like around the time Toby was starting to work on choirs, because I was thinking, like the Ferryman was on that, maybe I can write another song for the band. So started working on that. We played through like parts of it. It wasn't fully developed, but also Toby had like this sort of specific idea for choirs as a whole. I don't know if concept is quite I mean, he had a concept for the whole record, and it would have like kind of been out of place for me to just like, to have like a song by someone else in the middle of that. So I kind of just like, kept that for a while. And then when I was working on stuff for this band, just sort of came back to that sketch. And there are a few other like, sort of musical ideas that were sketches from years and years ago that I finally like, once I knew the instrumentation and had a specific project to work for, fleshed out into a complete song.
Okay, cool. And so from the time you left Kayo Dot, you recorded the Kayo Dot record, and then you left before we started playing live.
Yep.
Back at that point, and then you went to school for your grad program, and you got 2.
Yeah.
Degrees?
Yep.
You're not a doctor.
No, two masters. One in composition and the other in electronic music and recording media. Yep. It's grad school. They they like naming things.
Which is funny because you're the least person I know to be writing.
Oh yeah, I hate. Well, also part of that though was at Mills, it really seemed to me like there was a lot more interest and support in the electronic music program than in composition. And so I sort of felt like, as long as I was there, let me focus on like what's really good there. And also like, let's just find out, because I've been, complaining about synthesizers. Like, all right, let me just like follow this through and see if I can like, break through the wall and actually get into this stuff. And also it was a sort of like, it was a 2-year program, but there was enough overlap that I kind of, was there for 2 years for the first degree. And then 1 more year I could get the second degree additionally, so it kind of wasn't like double the amount of work to get the second degree. And there was some really cool stuff. Like, still my favorite synth that I've ever played with was the modular Moog at Mills, which is looks like a bunch of suitcases with knobs and jacks on them. And I think the class was called an Introduction to Electronic Music or something like that. But I was really, really happy the way the professor, Maggie Payne, organized it, because she was sort of teaching us fundamentals of waveforms and envelopes and all this kind of stuff. And it was like 2 months into the class before she even showed us how to plug the keyboard into it. Before that, it was all just like oscillators and mixers and envelopes and filters. And like when you'd go in to do your weekly assignment, you're just like, you're not, playing piano like stuff on a keyboard. You're taking patch cables and plugging in and turning knobs. and just using your ear to make sounds that, you know, that synthesizers are really good at making, and like forming these things in a way that is totally different than the like, oh, you press a button and it sounds kind of like something else. So that was really fun, and I did have fun with that synth. But like, yeah, by the end of it, I just personally don't find synthesizers as compelling as, you know, most other instruments.
I knew it was going to come up at some point on the interview.
Yeah.
Well, I will say, as much as we tease you about it, because we always are pretty relentless about that. Like, Terran, you like this? But I will say, like, yeah, as much as yeah, it's kind of funny and whatever. The point is that you developed, which I always thought was really cool, was you developed your own way of dealing with creating sounds like that and go into that, because instead of going the synthesizer route, you went with taking a Rhodes piano or Hammond organ, like, you know, which the sounds that you really like, but then affecting them to kind of give them almost a synth-like quality, but you're actually trying to a more adventurous way of creating sounds, correct?
Yeah, and that is like the thing about synths, and also I think part of my aversion to it is just that I've had to play them for so often, because you can't really, you know, you can't throw a piano in the van. I mean, at least not the vans we've toured in. So it's like, you know, I've kind of have had to do that. So a lot of it, I think, is just sort of like, I've just kind of had my fill of that stuff. And if I hadn't had to play synths for so many years, I might not be as averse to it. But yeah, like a lot of it, I think, is just that, you know, with physically resonating objects, there are all these like chaotic imperfections that are there to begin with, you know, and that's one of the interesting things is like, you know, you have this like concept of like, you know, the overtone series and, you know, resonant frequencies and, you know, attack and release and that kind of stuff. But in real life, none of that works the same way as it does in paper. There's always like the overtone series is not perfectly in tune. And it's not always precisely consistent. There's this like, you know, certain things pop out more than others, and so with like physically resonating objects, there's this sort of texture to it right out of the gate. Whereas like with synthesizers, you've just got like a sine wave. And again, the analogs are better at this because, like, you know, analog sine wave isn't as precise as like a digital, you know, mathematically figured out sine wave. But it's sort of like, I feel like with synths, you're starting with something totally sterile and then going through a lot of effort to try to add texture to it. Whereas if you start off with something that's already a physical object, like a Fender Rhodes or a Hammond organ, you are starting off with something that there are all these like mechanical imperfections in the thing. So you're starting off with something that has texture to it. You kind of get that for free. You don't need to go like try to figure out some algorithm to add texture to it. And that, you know, like effects are totally cool. I've never had any, you know, objection to using effects or stuff like that. I just find it a lot more interesting when you start off with like a sound that has a lot more to it, you know, at least to my ear to begin with, than these sort of like, you know, very sterile to my ear synth patches.
Well, no, I think that was a great explanation. I don't think I've ever actually gotten the full explanation from you, or I've never asked. I was like, oh, Terran doesn't like synth.
Yeah, or like another analogy I like to use. It's sort of like physical sculpture, right? And you know, there are these substances. You know, people like there might be a sculpture of marble or of bronze, you know, or of wood or of granite or whatever. And like whatever the material is, there's this texture to it already. You know, the ripples in the marble, or this sort of like, you know, bronze not quite wanting to be smooth, and you know, all these like divots and stuff. And so you'll do a sculpture of like even just something of like, you know, a human being, but like there's this like interplay between the shape you're imposing on it and the inherent texture of the thing itself. And so to me, like acoustic instruments tend to be more like, you know, marble or bronze that have these like intrinsic textures that no matter what you do to it, like you're not going to eliminate that, and that's part of the beauty of it, is this like interplay between the texture of the material and the form you're giving it to. Whereas like a lot of synthesizers, to me, it would be like making a sculpture out of injection molded plastic that's just like totally smooth, totally consistent color. And it's not that you can't do something creative with that, but it's more like it's just doesn't have this richness right out of the gate that a lot of other materials do. Yeah. And again, it's not like I think, synths are evil and no one should ever use them for anything. It's just like, personally, there are other things that are more interesting to me.
Yeah, well, and I think that's fine. I think it's, I think it's fine to have it's, to me, I was always impressed because, maybe in the studio we're like, but you can't deny the results that you got. Like, for instance, on Choirs of the Eye, I think it was the first, because we didn't really do that much with Maudlin, because Maudlin was pretty much mostly synthesizer, right? Mm-hmm. But with Choirs of the Eye was the first time you really started trying out different things, right?
Yeah, because totally, Maudlin was a lot of synths, and I think how that came about was when we were getting ready to go in to do choirs. I'm like, all right, let me do my sort of synth inventory here, because I had these modules. It'd be like, all right, there's like 2,000 sounds on this thing, and maybe a dozen of them are good. So I'm like having to go through and like, trying to listen to all the sounds and make notes about which ones I might actually want to use. And I'm just like doing this, and I'm like, okay, like this one's horrible. This one's useless. This one's useless. This one might be okay. This one's useless. This one might be okay. This one's pretty good, but like just not really being excited about any of them, and thinking, man, do I even need to use synths? Like the studio's got a real piano, a grand piano. It's got, I think it had a Fender Rhodes at the time. So sometimes I've gone into there and Jim's had to like, arrange for one, but there was a Fender Rhodes available. And I knew that, there was a B3, or maybe it was an M3, but some kind of Hammond organ there. Yeah. And I'm thinking, why? This is a studio. I've got those instruments there. Why should I use these like synth sounds that I'm really not excited about? When I could use these other things that I am excited about. And yeah, I borrowed an effects module from Toby and just started working out some patches to use as effects. And, it's be like, all right, so this is going to be Hammond organ, but I'm going to run it through this effect. So yeah, to give it this kind of more like, lush synthy kind of thing, but it's still, we're starting with this tone wheel organ thing that I like a lot better. And yeah, there were no synths at all on choirs. It was all just piano, Rhodes, and Hammond organ with various effects. Yeah,
it reminds me of Iron Maiden before they started using synthesizers on Somewhere in Time. On the Peace of Mind, like the liner notes, it says, "No synthesizers or ulterior motives were used in the recording of this album." And so I figure like we should have put that on the on the booklet for Choirs of the Eye. Well, so that brings up, I'm sure the fanboys would want me to ask this. So for those of the people who are listening who never got a chance to see Maudlin of the Well live, what were they missing? What did they miss out on in your memory?
Maudlin
of those 12 gigs.
Maudlin of the Well, I mean, I honestly, Sam and I have talked about this. Like, looking back, I don't think we were a great live band. I mean, like, yeah, seriously, like the show we did at the Stone, I think, was the best Maudlin of the Well ever sounded live. I think there were a lot of, because it started out as a studio project, and also there were just so many people in the band, and that's just hard to tie together live. So many channels to mix, so many sounds going on, so many people to listen to. And also because it was a studio thing, that's kind of where most of our experience was. And yeah, I think we just kind of like back in those days had a lot to learn about, playing live and translating that stuff we were doing in the studio to a live setting. So Yeah. Well, the good news is I think we've all progressed a lot since those days as live performers.
Yeah, 17 years later, we're pretty decent. Yeah. Well, of those, now on different podcasts, I think I've already told the horror story, which was Prog West, so we don't need to rehash that story. But of those original gigs, like, do you remember anyone standing out?
I mean, the performances themselves, it was just kind of like trying to play our parts in this weird thing and kind of not always getting it. I do remember a lot of fun stuff surrounding the shows. Yeah. Like I remember, like the Utica show, I remember being just like really psyched on it. We went ghost hunting afterwards, and then the next morning we had like milk straight from the cow. It was on a farm. And that was super fun. Oh man, you talk about Prog West being the horror story. What about our second time at the Milwaukee Metal Fest?
Well, yeah, but I mean, what was really terrible about that, other than getting cut short and only being able to play 2 songs?
Trashing my saxophone and losing Toby's amp.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
I guess the set. Well, yeah, and the set itself was like 2 songs. Yeah. We drove from Boston to Milwaukee to play 2 songs, and totally mess up my saxophone and lose. Toby's amp got stolen.
Yeah, exactly. It's definitely like one of those things where the risk and reward. Did not actually work out in my favor. No, you're right. That was. Well, I guess maybe I kind of blocked that out a little bit, just because I do remember being incredibly depressed after that set anyway. And this is before we lost the amp and the saxophone issues. I remember like being like super bummed and just like hanging out at the hotel we were at, and Kevin from Rainfall was in, walked by and said, "Yeah, what's the matter, buddy?" Well, and I think, I guess the main takeaway from that gig too, so this is Milwaukee Metal Fest 2001, because we played in 2000 and it was fine.
Yeah,
it was decent.
Yeah, well, and that also, it was like it was so exciting because we'd never played anything that big. It's like, we're playing the Milwaukee Metal Fest, and we go out there, and there's like all these other bands. I forget if that was a band where I hear someone like in the hotel yell, "Dying Fetus is having a party," or something like that.
That was at the New Jersey Metal Fest.
Oh, it was New Jersey. Sorry,
that was New Jersey, because I remember correctly. We were sleeping, or we were in bed in our hotel room, or on the floor or whatever, because we were all cramped in one room.
Yep.
And then Maria Stella came in and was just like, "Hey, Dying Fetus is here and they're having a party." And it's like,
but yeah, it was a super fun, that first time in Milwaukee. Like it was, I mean, didn't make any sense, financially to like drive that far to play one show, but it was a fun, we had a road trip, like we had a mission. We were going to go play the Milwaukee Metal Fest. We got to hanging out with Rainfell Within was awesome. Yeah. I always had a great time hanging out with those people. And then just being like surrounded and just going around, just like this stuff going on all the time, and like, oh, let's go check out what's going on in this room. Let's go showing out what's this stage, and just like stuff happening all over the place. And it was sort of, it was really fun and exciting that first time around. And then I sort of feel like the second time around, we were kind of more aware of the seams and kind of just the way putting together, like once that initial, like, excitement had worn off, seeing how it actually was really kind of exploitive of a lot of bands, this like pay to play thing, and then like scheduling things. So like, there's like, however many bands, but you can't see all of them because they're all at the same time. They didn't even try to like stagger things. So you would have like one band playing while another was like setting up on a different stage. It was just like everyone was playing at the same time and everyone was setting up at the same time. So that made it harder to see more stuff. And so, it was like super fun the first time. And the second time, we're like, oh, okay, maybe this isn't, still have great memories from the first time around. But the second time, like, okay, I'm not so thrilled about this particular thing anymore.
Yeah, and it really didn't end up well for us either. But actually talking about the first one. He's not here to defend himself, but Sam leading the charge from the bar. Do you remember that?
No.
I forget who told me the story, but do you remember that we were hanging out in the hotel bar like the first night we were there? I just remember we met the dude from Corvus Corax. I remember that, and
I'm not sure if I was there. I don't remember meeting the Corvus Corax dude. I mean, I was there like in Milwaukee, but I don't know if
you might have been. You might not have come down to the bar with us.
Okay.
But some of us are hanging out in the bar, and I think again we were all crammed into one hotel room, 10 of us, and then some of us had went back up to the hotel room, but I think Sam was still down in the bar drinking with all the different, because at that point it was like different people from different bands all congregating, and then I guess the hotel bar closed, and someone was like, "Oh man!" And then someone said, "Oh, well, there's a bar down the street," and Sam goes, "I know where it is. Let's go!" And this is the story that was told to me, is that he led the charge. I'm like, "We will find the new bar."
Nice.
You could ask him if it's true or not. It could very well have been made up, but I could have sworn that that's what happened.
Yeah, I'll ask him when I get back in town.
Oh, fun times. And then you didn't play with us at first with Kayo Dot, but then when you moved back to New York in 2010?
It was 8 or 9.
Oh, 8 or 9.
I think it might have been 8.
And then you were living in New York for a while, and then in Connecticut. But then you had rejoined Kayo Dot, and so you performed on. I mean, did you start with Coyote?
That was the first one I recorded with. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
So and Kayo Dot is why I moved back out to the East Coast. When I first started touring with them, we were touring the Blue Layman Sea Downward repertoire because that was recorded basically with Toby and Mia and a bunch of studio guys essentially. So I wasn't on that record, but like when I started off touring in support of that record.
Okay.
Yeah, and then Coyote was the first one I actually recorded on when I was back in Kayo Dot.
Okay, and so you were with them until Hubardo.
Yeah, Hubardo was my last.
Okay.
Which, yeah, man, good way to go out. I love that record.
Yeah. And so what kind of prompted you to go back to West Coast? I know it's not like a personal thing, but
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I just really couldn't stand New York. It was just, filthy and crowded, and I just heard, and just like hearing everyone refer to it as like the greatest city on earth. And like every time I hear that, I keep thinking, have you ever lived in any other city? Because like New York is close to my least favorite cities I've ever lived in. Yeah, so it was just kind of, I don't know, just like I was not in a good headspace there, and just like I got in the same thing where it's just like kind of got in this downward spiral where I was just like cranky all the time, and so I'm sure I was not fun to be around for my friends and bandmates and stuff. And I'm just like, I gotta get out of here, and yeah, that was basically it.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's stuff like hiking. I had no idea how important that was to me until I couldn't do it anymore. That like in Oakland, I can just like hop in my car, go up to Joaquin Miller Valley or Joaquin Miller Park, and be at a trailhead in 20 minutes, and like go out there and within a few minutes just be surrounded by redwoods and you can't even see a road or a car or anything like that. And it's just for me really useful to just like clear my head and take a breath. And you just like you can't do that anywhere in New York City. There's great hiking upstate, but you need to like plan a day around it, like take a train way the hell out of the city, then probably rent a car to get to, it's just like something that like you could get to in 20 minutes from Oakland. It'd take like a few hours in New York City. And and the stuff that is like really that New York is really big at, all the city stuff, I kind of don't really care that much about. So it's just like, all right, this is not the right place for me. And that's yeah. And Oakland actually really grew on me, which I kind of wasn't expecting, because I just moved out there for grad school and didn't really plan on sticking around. I wasn't really excited to be in Oakland or the Bay Area specifically when I went out to Mills. But as I lived there, it actually really started growing on me. And it's, I think, the only place that I liked better the more, the longer I lived there. And so that was also part of the thing about New York is just like, all right, there is a place where I actually kind of liked it when I was there. And moving around, I do really like that I bounced around a lot because it's also like, how am I going to know if where I am is where I want to be if I haven't lived anywhere else? Yeah. So I am really glad that I had the opportunity to live, in Boston and Connecticut and New York and, Southern California where I grew up and I've seen these different places, but also realizing that like every time you move, you lose a lot of ground, in terms of like, money and a stable financial situation, in terms of, connections, like musicians, to play with and stuff like that. And so it's also like, okay, moving around, like there is something I like about it, but don't like that I keep like losing ground every time I move. And I think maybe it is a point where now I've seen enough places, I should pick one and live there long term and really, work on building something in one place rather than like have something that I start for a few years and then scrap because I like move 3,000 miles away. So that also is sort of like, let me find some place I could actually see myself living long term so I can build towards something. Yeah. And Oakland was, my favorite place that I've lived. So I'm like, all right. And I still, like Sam was out there, so I wasn't even starting from zero. So that seemed like, a good place. And I've been happy that I did it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's important. It's important to have, especially when you're kind of pursuing some kind of creative thing. It's good to be in a decent mental state when you're doing it, so that you're not just like writing songs from a place of hatred. Yeah. I mean, unless you're in a death metal band, I suppose. Yeah. Well, you brought up, so you grew up in Ventura, California. Yep. Down by the ocean, right? Yeah. Yeah. I was always kind of curious. So when I first met you at Hampshire College, you're definitely more of a jazz guy. Mm-hmm. And so what kind of, like when you first got started playing music, I mean, what was kind of your initial thing that made you want to play music or pursue it? Like what did you hear that made you want to keep going?
Yeah, well, really, it was the classical stuff that got me hooked to begin with. Because when I was in, like grade school or whatever and played, first recorder and then clarinet and then piano. And there, so I was like, my parents listened to classical among other things. So I was exposed to that. I grew up with, Chopin and Tchaikovsky and Beethoven, in the house and there for me to listen to when I wanted to. And then also like, 80s pop music on the radio because, when I was in grade school, I just like turn on the radio and whatever. And, kind of the classical stuck with me and the pop music didn't really. So yeah, like the classical is kind of what first got me into it. But also, like a lot of that stuff is hundreds and hundreds of years old. So like, jazz was something that I, more in high school started getting into, and especially playing clarinet. And then I started on saxophone and like, jazz is a pretty obvious thing, when you're playing saxophone. And so, yeah, when I started at college, I think I kind of thought I was a jazz guy. It's like, hey, I had a John Coltrane record and I knew what a Dorian scale was and, and then I started studying jazz in college and being exposed to a lot more of it and kind of realized that by the end of it, I kind of feel like I realized I was not a jazz guy. Which isn't to say I don't like it, but just like, first of all, that I didn't really, it's huge and I know a lot more about it than I did then. But I didn't, I've never had the same grounding in jazz as I did in classical. Okay. And also just in terms of what I want, what I want to do, it's like, yeah, it's really, really beautiful, but that's not the thing that I really want to totally commit to. And there, like classical I've always been into. And I also like, as largely through, knowing Toby, kind of did start thinking more seriously about, rock and metal, which I kind of, yeah, just the whole like studying music thing. A lot of times that's kind of like, oh, that's just sort of, and also having sort of in a certain sense grown out of a lot of the pop stuff I was listening to. um for a while I kind of hadn't really considered like rock as being something I would actually like seriously pursue. But then yeah, through experiences, college, and learning more about a lot of different kinds of music, also kind of like throwing out this idea of like legitimate or illegitimate or like serious or superfluous music or whatever. It's just like do what you know do what you have the passion to do, and who cares about like what genre it would be categorized in. And so yeah, so I feel like now kind of like the classical and rock metal stuff is what interests me a lot. But at the same time, it's kind of funny because with Vesper Moth, whenever someone asks me like to describe it, I try to like get someone else to because I find that usually the people making the music are the ones that have the least perspective on it. So it's like I have certain things I'm trying to do with it, but I kind of, in a certain sense, don't know what it sounds like to anyone else who are hearing it from a different perspective. And Ree at one point said it sounded to him like a cross between Alice in Chains and bebop. And I totally got the Alice in Chains thing, but I'm like, wait, bebop, really? Because like, I mean, it doesn't swing. How can this be bebop if it doesn't swing? But I do like, I have now, at this point, studied and listened to enough jazz that it is kind of elements of that are just part of my vocabulary. So I'm like, oh yeah, I guess a lot of the harmonies I use, especially, playing keys, I do use these extended chords that you might find in bebop or something like that. So it's, I don't consider myself to be a jazz musician, but I think at this point there is like that influence on the stuff I make, whether I'm doing it consciously or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just what you're doing now. I mean, it's, what does it sound like? Well, if someone asks me what Vesper Moth sounds like, I'd be like, oh, it sounds like Terran. Well, no, because I know you're in, the stuff that you're into, that you were listening to, and you're right. Like at a certain point, I mean, especially, I'm noticing this about myself as I get older. Like you just realize like certain things are just part of your musical identity, and whether or not you're actually trying to, like, like for instance, like I could play something that sounds a lot like Metallica, or have like a Metallica vibe to it, and like I would never in a million years want to play Metallica type stuff, like exactly. Right. But like I'm not trying to rip off Metallica, but it's just from so many years of listening to them and studying their stuff, and like putting that in my musical essence as a young child, and now it's just kind of built into the fabric of what I do.
Yeah, exactly.
So, well, yeah, I mean, I always kind of like, I always felt like you maybe were more interested in the classical side than the jazz side because I mean, like you were also, like you said, more interested in the composition side of things. That's why you went to school for it. I mean, what kind of prompted you to want, like, what were you hoping to get out of studying composition?
Well, I think part of the thing was I felt like that was kind of, well, that's sort of another interesting about like changes from when I started college to when I graduated undergraduate. It really never would have occurred to me to major in composition when I started. I just like, I still kind of had this idea of like, oh yeah, I definitely identified as a musician, but like I thought of a musician as being someone who played music, like of course performance is what I like. I'm a musician. That's what I do. I like have, play my saxophone or my clarinet or the piano. And hadn't really like, seriously, and I even knew some people that, some of my friends were interested in composition, but never really, thought about that much myself. But then like, yeah, through the course of college started, doing some composition. Had a couple summers with this composer named Miguel del Aguila, who ran this kind of program for young composers in Ventura County, where I'd still spent most of the summers with my parents during college, and wrote a few pieces for that actually were performed, and like in a certain sense, I kind of felt like by the end of college that's sort of what I was better at in a lot of cases of like figuring out, that just like I've never been a virtuoso. I'm not the kind of person that will go through and like practice the same thing again and again and again until it's like absolutely spotless. I mean, like I do practice and I do it regularly and conscientiously, but there's a certain level that I don't think I'm ever going to get to. Partly because it's just like, I don't know, just it's very, very frustrating for me past a certain point to be like, all right, this is 95% there, but it's going to take another 100 hours of practice to get 96% there. And also like, being a multi-instrumentalist, it's hard to be virtuoso when your, efforts are divided among two or three totally different instruments. But what I felt really good about was being able to like work out, okay, so if I do this here and then you do that at the same time, and this other person does that, it'll lock together in this like really cool way. And I found that to be like really rewarding, and also that's a place where sort of being playing different instruments helped, because I kind of had more insight that even if I wasn't like, the greatest piano player ever, I knew what piano was good at, what things would be tricky, what things would be awkward, and clarinet and saxophone and just having like, played around with different things. It's helpful to know a little bit about an instrument when you're like, arranging for other people to play. So yeah, a lot of it was, that's something that it never occurred to me to focus on, but when I went back to school to study, like I really felt like that's probably what my biggest strength was, and that's why I wanted to study composition in grad school.
Yeah. Okay. That's cool. Getting to know parts of Terran that I never knew. Now, as you kind of delved into the composition, I think people think of, especially when people talk about classical music, they think of it as kind of this rigid, what's on the page is the Bible, is law,
Right.
And then, but then also you have the jazz side of things where, there's the improvisation, because you did, you know how to improv, like, we could play a show and I could be like, B minor.
Yep.
And here's the changes, go for it. So there's that kind of spontaneity, and, so when you're approaching it, I mean, when you're composing, is there kind of, how do you, is it like you have two different sides of your brain, which are your music brain, which work, or do you find that one kind of informs the other or can work in conjunction with it in any way?
Yeah, I mean, for me, improvisation is kind of brainstorming, and that's how a lot of stuff, maybe everything really starts. Is I'll just be sitting an instrument, just playing, noodling around, and I'll hit on something and I'll think, oh, that's pretty good. Let me work on that. Let me refine that. Let me improve it and try to get that to its best self. And that's, I think, kind of another way, sort of why I end up more into like the through compose stuff than the improvisation. Because yeah, improvisation can be totally amazing, and like I love hearing really, really good improvisers. But when I'm working on stuff, usually when I am improvising and hit something really good, I don't want to keep going. I want to like, wait, let me go back to that. That was pretty good, but I bet I can do it better. Let me figure out how I could do it better. Or, oh man, I bet that'd sound awesome if this other person was playing it on their instrument. And yeah, a lot of it for me is just sort of like this kind of like, refining, like figuring out ideas and getting things to lock up in a certain way, or just developing things in a certain way. Because that's one of the things that I find that I think I like the most about classical music is the sort of the organic development of ideas, whereas like there's a lot of rock bands where I love the sound and I like the songs, but like so many rock songs, you're like, all right, here's a riff, do this 4 times, then switch to this other riff, do that 4 times, and these like literal repetitions of things. And, whereas, in classical music, not that that never happens, but it's much more common to have this idea and like, all right, so here's a melody and we're going to do this. Okay, now we're going to like shift it up a third, or we're going to play it in a different key, or we're going to like do it upside down, or play just the first half, and like all these different ways of like manipulating it and coming at it from different angles. And that is sort of what I find, really compelling, and something that like I try to mesh. Although it's also tricky when you've got, because you also want there to be a groove with rock music. There's like usually a backbeat you're focused on, certain like bass line that people can relate to. So it is kind of tricky to like how do you get the groove but still the organic development. But at the same time, that's like a great challenge to try to tackle.
All right, cool. And so bringing things back full circle to what you're doing now with Vesper Moth. I see. I don't go in a specific chronological order. I just start with, this is you as a baby. So now, so when you're writing music for Vesper Moth, is it written out?
Yeah, I actually I do everything in Finale and actually hand people parts. With Sam, I don't write out every like drum hit. I usually give him what we typically refer to as big band charts, because it's sort of the same format used in jazz big bands. That like, a lot of like just sort of hash marks of like, here's the time signature, here's the measures, and like, here's like important rhythms. Like, all right, here's the rhythm the bass is playing here, here's the rhythm the voice is singing here, so that he knows like which rhythms are prevalent, and then he like makes his own part from there. But yeah, so far voice and bass are just like totally written out. Here's your part, learn it please. and sometimes things change in rehearsal. I definitely like that's the starting point, not like here is exactly what you were supposed to do, but it's like, all right, here's a starting point. Because the tricky thing, I just sort of feel like stuff comes together faster if you have a complete thing to start with. Rather than like, all right, because there's some bands where like someone will come up with a riff, and then like someone will try to come up with another riff that goes with it, and that that can work, and that's a totally valid approach to doing things. But especially when everyone has their own other creative projects, I feel like things would probably in this case come together a lot more slowly if I just sort of came in with kind of like a scrap of an idea and we had to spend rehearsal time fleshing that out, versus if I fleshed it out on my own, brought that to rehearsal, and then we spent our rehearsal time, refining that, adjusting the things that didn't quite suit the instrument as well as I hoped for. And, like just sort of workshopping something, but at least we've got kind of a complete starting point.
Yeah. All right, cool. Yeah, I was wondering how that worked with. Yeah, but I think from talking with Toby too about this, is I think when you're working with, I don't want to say professionals, but when you're working with musicians who are pretty well studied and like know their shit when it comes to they can read music, they can sight read, something I'm terrible at, but like. It seems to me like if you can get people that are all on that same level, the idea of handing them a written piece of music is somehow a much better way of communicating your ideas to them than trying to take what's on that written page that you hear in your head a certain way and trying to verbalize that in like some sort of way, like, well, yeah, you got to do so, or like trying to explain the accents and the I don't know, all the fancy stuff that you put in sheet music.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like if you have a specific idea of like these pitches and these rhythms, like why wouldn't you write it down if like you know what that's supposed to be? I mean, some people like just prefer a much more improvisational thing, and that's fine. And you know, like you wouldn't want to write down every note if it's a more improvisational thing. But if you have a specific idea, yeah, and the other person knows how to read music, that's totally the fastest way to get that across. And also in terms of writing things out, it really depends, I think, a lot on the other musicians' like time and interest and stuff too. Like, you know, if you know, Ree was like, hey, I'd really like to write a bass part on like the new stuff or whatever, I'd totally be fine with just like leaving that out and letting him come up with it. But you know, he's got this stop motion video that's like totally his focus, and you know, like I think he's just as happy to not have to spend his own time coming up with parts, you know, in addition to that.
Yeah.
And yeah, Janet, I'll talk to as we start. You know, like right now, I'm focused on recording the music we have now. But for new stuff, maybe she will have more creative input in the parts. It's really like, you know, largely about what other people in the band want to do, and it's not like I have this thing where like people have to play exactly what I write. But just if people aren't really excited about writing their own parts and it's faster for me to like work that out for them, then I'll work that out for them.
Okay. So you're not a taskmaster who, if somebody messes up a thing, you throw a drumstick at them.
No, Sam has all the drumsticks.
Yeah. Or, sorry, I couldn't think of what you might actually throw at them.
Yeah, I could throw my pencil, but then I wouldn't have anything to write with.
Yeah.
So.
And also you might stab them and get lead poisoning. You know, it's always a thing. All right, well, that's cool. I mean, so hopefully by the time this comes out, Vesper Moth will have recorded an album, and at this point I could interject, go buy the album here.
Yeah.
Like little ad right here, or at the beginning of the interview. So past Vesper Moth's first recording, or proper recording, what are your other kind of musical goals? Like, do you have any other things you'd like to be doing besides just Vesper Moth? Like, is there any kind of composition you're trying to get, like things you want to do more from a compositional standpoint as opposed to composing for the band and performing with the band? Are the things, like things you want to get performed by the Oakland Symphony Orchestra or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be awesome to have something performed by an orchestra, but I kind of at this point I'm really sort of focused on the band as my compositional focus, because especially I think that's one of the reasons it took me so long to kind of get my own thing going, is like, I would do like, let me write this for a string quartet, or let me write this thing for a piano trio, but then you've got like all these pieces for totally different instrumentations. And it's like not even, like a band, if like you have this consistent group of people, you can like rehearse stuff, people have, time committed to this project, like you're used to working with each other. Whereas like if you have all these different ensembles, like, even one concert could be like, 20 different people or whatever, and just trying to like coordinate and get that many people interested in that sort of thing. I think it's like, very, very difficult, unless you're in a situation like a college professor, maybe, where you've got like certain ensembles you have access to. Just sort of doing stuff on your own, I think it's very, very difficult to compose for different ensembles. It's much, and even if you were going to, if I was going to go more into like classical stuff, I think I would probably pick an ensemble and just stick with it and do like, a record's worth of, string quartet or, wind quintet or something like that, so that there would be like, a small group of people that could do all the stuff, rather than like having someone come in for like one piece and then only play that one piece, and having someone else to come in for the next piece. Okay. So as far as that, I'm, Vesper Moth is the focus. One other project I'm working on right now, though, is Janet Collar, the singer. I mentioned before, she's a dancer, and she's working on this choreography project based on kind of the life and story of Valeska Garrett, who's this dancer and artist. She was, I think, started off as in like the German cabaret in like the 20s or 30s, and it ended up as sort of like the godmother of punk in certain ways. Just like she had this really kind of like abrasive attitude, and like just really pushing like the boundaries of performance. And I'm gonna be doing like sound design and some musical stuff on that project, which is gonna be a totally new thing for me. I've never worked with dance before, but I'm really really excited about it, and that definitely is going to be another sort of like creative thing that I'm doing. Like some of it I guess would be more sound design than composition, but still sound-based creative stuff that I'm really excited to be working on.
Okay, cool. All right, man. Well, thanks for sitting
Yeah.
and talking.
Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Yeah.